So looking at the different fields we've got and where they sit across the model. So we have a student engagement entity, student core session is where a lot of this is kind of referenced from. So we have funding body sitting off student core session. We have a funding and monitoring entity sitting off student core session as well. And then we've got a couple of things sitting off kind of course and course role. So picking them apart to start with. So I'm going to go into more detail about each of these, but just to give you a rough idea of where they all sit. So the HESA ID that's sitting within course role, one of the funder code within that is the equivalent to what MS Fund does at the moment, and that's only for Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, Welsh providers. So the FUNDLEV field that we have currently in the records is being kind of split in half. So some of that is sitting on course at the moment and some of that is sitting on the funding and monitoring entity. And then we've got the non-regulated fee field, which is the equivalent of the code 9 in the SPECFEE field at the moment. It's kind of scattered a little bit across the model, so I'll go into more detail about what each of those are now. So MS Fund, which is currently what it's called. So that is, as I said, it's in the course role entity. So that's obviously sitting off the course entity. And this is only for providers in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And this is basically listing all those usual valid entries to say which of these organisations is funding the course. And there's a couple of generic ones there as well if relevant. So that one's fairly simple. The funding body entity then. So we have an entity in the data features model, which is kind of the equivalent to a fund code now. And this is recording where bodies are kind of could be funded by these providers. So that's why it's similar to fund code. So you're eligible for funding from these. You can return as many as you need to. It's an entity, so it can be returned multiple times. In terms of the values that are on there, it's pretty much the same as the ones we've got. Yeah, all the statutory customers and the different other organisations that fund courses. There's a question mark over the Research Council one at the moment. There's a question sat with UKRI just checking that they need that. So those may come out in a future release. So a couple of specific ones then. So the student employers, that's for providers in Wales who've got those part-time courses. And the Research Council, obviously, when you return those ones, you also have to return the Research Council ID. That's fairly similar to the fund code we have at the moment. We've then got the funding and monitoring entity. So this is one of the entities like funding body that's they're sitting off student core session. So the 4 fields we have there are ELQ, funding completion again, the funding length, so that's one of the ones that's been split in half, and the non-regulated fee flag, and again that's a new one. So one thing just to note on this entity is these 4 examples, but there are other ones as well after student core session. They all rely on a 12-month kind of period because that's students get funded once a year when they get their kind of fees, and that's where everything's sat there. So it's sitting against the student core session for that reason. That does mean you need to make sure that that is where you're kind of using this equivalent to. So as with now, everyone is kind of August to July, but in data futures, everything is done off that student's course session. So some of those dates might be different, but they're all based on a 12-month period. So looking a little bit more detail on all of those fields that are within the funding and monitoring entity. So ELQ, all the definitions are the same as they are now. It's provided in England only, that's still the case. So that is pretty much the same. Not really much to say on that one. So funding completion. So again, this is off student core session, not necessarily the standard HESA reporting year of instance. Otherwise, definitions are the same. All the same rules, all the same kind of checking up on statutory customer websites for different definitions. That is all the same. So the FUNDLEV field then, so this is where it's split in half. So those values on the screen now, those are what we currently have in the student record. And now the student alternative record, actually. We've split that in half. So we've tried to break apart the two concepts that were kind of in there. So we've got funding level field at the minute, which is on the course entity. We think we may actually need to move this off course, but we're just working through that detail. So if we do that, we'll let you know. It might move to the qualification entity instead, but it will be doing the same thing. It's recording the kind of level that course is kind of there. Then the other half of this is around the fund length, then, so the funding length. So how long that kind of student course session is with the various definitions. And that's the one that's on funding and monitoring entity. So just picking those ones apart a little bit. FUNDLEV. So this is return against course. As I said, it might move to the qualification entity, but it's kind of, yeah, it's the level in relation to qualifications students are required to hold. So when they have to have had qualifications level 6 or below or above. And that coding should be consistent with what's in early statistics returns. So funding length. So as I said, that's on the funding and monitoring entity. You can use the not applicable code 99 when the student isn't within the HESIS population, and you wouldn't normally be returning this. That is okay. And so, yeah, full definitions on, well, this one's got the Office for Students example. So looking at the special fee equivalent then. So these are the codes that we have in the current student return. And this is what has happened to them. So the first one has moved to kind of all the stuff that's normally captured within there will be captured in the normal fee fields, which Ruth has already explained at the first half of this. Then the next few are around kind of placement activity. So all of this, sandwich placements, whether they're Erasmus, whether they're full year or not full year, that detail is all captured now within either the placement flag or the off-venue activity. We don't need codes 4, 5, and 6. They're not required anymore, so we can ignore them. So that just leaves us with the SPECFEE 9 equivalent, which is where we've got this new field for the non-regulated fees. So I will talk a little bit about the definitions, although you probably all understand this better than I do. So yes, it is the SPECFEE 9 equivalent. Anything that was in there pretty much will be in this field. But we're trying to be clear about what that actually means for providers. So you return it in the funding and monitoring entity against the student course session when the fee is not regulated. If so, just giving some examples. So if the provider's got discretion over the fee charge, then that would be 0-1 because they're not regulated. They don't need to adjust this field in terms of individual waivers and things like that. That's taken care of in the fee field. It's not related to this. So a couple of exemptions for kind of PGR students. So most of them probably be in there, but the ones who are regulated, which are these examples here, don't need to flag this in this field. So if you're studying on an ICT course, something like a PGCE, that is regulated. If you're doing one of the part 1 or part 2 for the RIBA examinations, that's also regulated, so you don't need to flag it. And for providers in England, if you're the pre-registration nurses and other subjects, if it's after August 2017, then again, that's regulated, so you don't need to flag it here. Providers in Scotland have a slightly different definition for this one. So the regulated fee for Scotland refers to the standard kind of tuition fee paid, or for the other EU students who are on deregulated tuition fees. so long as they entered after 2012-13. And PGR students are not covered for providers in Scotland. So a couple of other specific examples I thought would be helpful to mention. So funded by a research council students. So UKRI have slightly different requirements to other statutory customers in that they need to identify when a student has actually been funded by a research council and which councils they are. So the student is flagged on the research council student identifier field on the engagement to say that they've got a research council funding and which one, and then they return their identifier so that we can link them up to UKRI details and stuff. So that's slightly different because the funding body for everyone else is that they're eligible for that funding, not that they necessarily receive funding. As I said earlier, we are having discussions about whether the Research Council fields might come out of funding body, but those discussions are still ongoing at the moment. So the other example we get asked a lot is around funding by DFE for ITT students. So as we've announced in Data Futures, the ITT record is not within scope for Data Futures, but that doesn't mean that ITT students are out of the record. They're not. They are included in the Data Futures record. But there's things like the bursary information, which is collected through the ITT record, which isn't at the moment included. So none of that kind of stuff in terms of their funding is in the Data Futures record. It's everything that's equivalent to a current student record that is in Data Futures. So all of that funding will carry on for now through the ITT record. That's something just to be clear about, because sometimes that gets people confused. ITT students are in the record. So I might just pause there because I've only got a few slides left, but those are the main kind of funding fields. Laura, is there any questions for now?
Nothing that's come in as of yet for this section.
Okay. I'll carry on through the last few then, and we can have a bit of a pause at the end if anyone's got any questions.
Cool.
So the last section then is around the student financial support. So we have this kind of concept in the student record at the moment. And so changing this picture slightly, this is only interested in the student financial support entity, which is sitting off the student course session. So in terms of what it's recording, very similar to the financial support entity we have currently, but we've added in the disabled students allowance. That's currently collected through the DISALL field. And we've also added in the HEFKey part-time fee waiver as well, which has got its own field fee waive type in the student record. So that's all collected within the same entity now. This also includes the 2021 change, which is published on our notification of changes on our website if you want to go check that, which is a new requirement for English providers only. And I will just quickly touch on that one, given it's a new requirement. So it only applies to the English providers, so the approved CCAP category, and those who've got an access and participation plan that has been approved. So basically, whenever a provider returns something in the student financial support entity that is relevant to their access and participation plan, they would use this flag to say, yes, this kind of counts towards it, so that the OFS can see which ones of those items actually you're referring to. So just to recap a little bit, so the student financial support entity has a couple of fields. So it's got that AppSend field that I just talked about. AppSend, how we say it. We've also got the FinSup type field, so the financial support type field, which has got very similar categories to the current financial support fin type. So the cash, the near cash, accommodation, and other type of financial support. So those definitions are all the same as they are now. Then we've got the new inclusions of the disabled students allowance and the part-time waivers as well. They are also included in that. So the FinSup amount, so financial support amount field, again, similar to the financial support fin amount field. We've all got very similar names on here. So that is recording the amounts that are relevant to the different categories you return above. You don't need to return it for disabled students allowance because that's just a flag to say the student has that. So I think that is all the slides we were going to get through.
Right, thank you everybody. We will close that for today and see you for next week's, which is on venue, location and off-venue activities.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.